Oi, improving self-consistency in LLMs through probabilistic tokenization. This is a cool method we have here today where instead of prompt engineering and running many different outputs using temperature to get a better answer out of a model, they instead mess with the actual tokenization and of the input prompts and choose many different versions of that to get more diverse and therefore more accurate outputs. It's pretty clever, and I would like to see, hopefully, edits on this and inspiration from it in the pre-training phase instead. But I digress. That's an idea for a different day. Think y'all will enjoy this one. Like, subscribe, comment, all the YouTube things before we get started. Follow on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you are a big fan, then support by hitting that YouTube join button down below for as low as $1 a month. That'll get you early access to my videos as well as a unique Discord role. Optionally, you can support through Patreon or Substack as well. And let's get into it. So one way to improve performance and self-consistency of an LLM in a reasoning task is to generate diverse reasoning paths for a given problem, right? Traditional self-consistency, the prompting technique anyway, talks about having the LLM give you multiple answers, like literally just make a new chat window in ChatGPT's online interface, ask the same question over and over again in different chat windows, and choose the best answer, right? In this work, differently, they propose to use multiple tokenizations as a primary way to generate diverse reasoning paths. The hypothesis is that different sequences of tokens for the same input string should naturally lead to different and diverse generations without having to use traditional just temperature randomness. However, we need an actual well thought out way to do this, given that if you were to just randomly drop out some percent of the BPE merges, the byte pair encoding merges, that would probably lead to degradation in performance, has been shown to in the past, and just because the LLM likely doesn't even get trained with a lot of the actual possible tokens it has access to, and certainly wouldn't have seen your given input prompt in that configuration of tokens during training, given that you likely didn't do this random dropping of BPE merges during training, which, by the way, I want to test that out, see how the LLM performs if you randomly drop out some percent of BPE merges. That'd be kind of cool to see. So they use as a base just a unigram language model to estimate the probability of a given token. And we'll get back to how that works in a second. But first step here, just to see what we mean when we say different tokenizations, is if with your given byte pair encoding, there's multiple ways to tokenize, you could just use the greedy version of always the largest token, but you could also just use smaller pairs in your byte pair encoding. So here in this sentence seems roughly the same up to when they actually do the acronym BPE. They could do dash BPE, or they could do dash B PE, or they could do that same thing, or they could split it up later. Here we have, for example, the word unigram. You could split it up into, uh, by dash I meant space, by the way. You could split it up into space UN, then I, then gram, or just space U, then NI, or space UN, then IGR, right? The different ways to phrase or to lay out these subword pieces, and given that this is your input prompt, will likely have somewhat different outputs when you actually have the model perform completions based off your input prompt. And so roughly what they're doing with using this unigram language model is they are using the probabilities that they get from it, this very simple version, and using those to choose which actual tokens we get as outputs when tokenizing our prompt. Reason being, if you were to just drop random token merges, random pair merges from your BPE tokenizer, that would not work as well as this unigram model, which actually has some idea as to the probability of language, given that it itself is a language model, however small and dumb and bad. So it's effectively a more intelligent version than just random drops of specific tokens or of random tokens. So they're going to try out these different token prompts with a couple different models, most notably the original Gemma and Llama 3 8 billion and Mistral 7B. And for each model, they'll report the baseline numbers, which use the standard BPE tokenization. And just for sake of not comparing to no method at all, they do compare against chain of thought and self-consistency baseline as well. If you're not familiar, chain of thought, you know what chain of thought is by now, but self-consistency is just when you have multiple outputs from the model, you choose the best of those outputs, or more simply, the most common of those outputs, and you assume the most common is the best, and they sample 64 times and choose the most common, aka hopefully best answer with that prompting based method, right? But instead of prompting their own method, probabilistic tokenization, they still use the same chain of thought prompt, so that part still happens. But instead of self consistency, instead of sampling many different just random temperature outputs of the model, they sample 64 different tokenizations for the actual input prompt, and they greedily decode based off those input tokenizations to generate diverse reasoning paths. This is interesting because greedy decoding is just not something we really use unless you have a very well fine-tuned model with very strict needs. This part where it's greedy instead of still being somewhat random, still having some temperature value, is necessary for control, I guess, in this experiment. I would have liked to see more ablations on greedy versus not greedy, etc. But in theory, I would assume you could probably get even better results with just some bit of a temperature value. So to that extent, it may be that this paper could be even underestimating the actual performance here. And they do in fact find that their probabilistic tokenization method does have an average higher performance gain than just chain of thought plus self-consistency. Interestingly, when you look at oracles for both methods, aka post hoc picking of the actual ideal output, as in from everything that was created out of every single of the 64 options created by chain of thought plus self-consistency, and similarly every single 64 output option, when you go through and actually see if did this method have somewhere in there the best answer, even if the best answer wasn't actually chosen by mode, by the most common answer, and you use that oracle, aka that specific fine pick selection of just the best answers from the options as opposed to the most common answers. And keep in mind, you can't do an oracle usually. They can only do an oracle here because it's an experiment and they knew the answer. Whereas real life inference, your actual business's pipeline, whatever, you could not have an oracle. But interestingly, they found that the oracle of this probabilistic tokenization method was significantly better than the oracle of the chain of thought self-consistency method. And in particular, their tokenization oracle had significantly more diverse reasoning paths compared to the self-consistency reasoning paths. The self-consistency ones tend to just be syntactically different, as in they rephrase things differently, but they very rarely actually have different reasoning paths. So that is a crazy cool finding right there. Here we see some actual big result table. We compare the self-consistency majority, the self-consistency oracle, the probabilistic tokenization majority, and PT oracle to each other. And the oracles aren't a fair look, so we don't actually include them in our actual final values or anything in our but it does seem like a full percentage point uh, or almost a full percentage point increase on the average across these different models and 4 different benchmarks. And then here we see that oracle difference, 64% average accuracy for the self-consistency oracle versus 71.4% for the tokenization oracle. Now, limitations, of course, the difficult part of this method is to get that first unigram model to help you make your actual different tokenizations. You need access to a sufficiently large and diverse data set of documents that is potentially even separate from your actual language modeling corpus, although you probably want to do the same one. And this is just the fact that you have to train an entirely separate model to do this kind of sucks. To be fair, obviously unigram models are very tiny and computationally cheap, but still you do have to dedicate some time beforehand to training a separate model. And they used a full 10 billion tokens here to make that work. That's a lot. I would like to see if it works on 1 billion or even like 10 million or something. I don't know. If you are doing a domain specific task, then this you should be able to use far less tokens. And keep in mind that you have to train that unigram model off of domain specific data if you're doing a domain specific task. It doesn't make any sense to do general web data if the actual final big model being used is only doing code or something. Also of interest here, they found that improvements from this method were actually larger for more capable models. If the base model is not very capable, It may not be robust to changes in tokenizations, or it just may not be very good at generating very diverse reasoning paths. The ones it does might be just superficially diverse, aka the syntax thing from earlier, but it seems like larger models benefit more from this method. That is it for today. Let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, comment, all that YouTube stuff. Follow on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you want to support me, if you're a big fan and you enjoy my videos and you have the means to do so, hit that YouTube join button down below. As little as $1 per month, you will get a special role in the Discord with a different color username and unique emojis that only that role can use, and more importantly, you will get early access to my videos when they get uploaded as opposed to when they actually get released. Thank y'all for watching. End of video.